The next crisis will not begin where most people are looking. It will not begin with a famous bank failing on a Friday afternoon. It will not begin with a stock market crash that every television channel can replay for a week. It will begin quietly inside the balance sheets of nations where debt rises, currencies weaken, reserves shrink, and politicians keep choosing delay over discipline. I have spent my life watching people mistake noise for danger. A falling stock price frightens them. A falling currency often does not. A missed earnings report gets their attention. A government spending more on interest every year than it can honestly afford somehow feels distant. But sovereign debt is not distant. When a country loses financial credibility, the first victim is the currency. When the currency weakens, food, fuel, medicine, and imported goods become more expensive. When those prices rise faster than wages, the crisis walks straight into the kitchen. That is why this countdown matters. 7 countries are showing different stages of the same old mechanism: excessive debt, weak reserves, currency pressure, political promises that cannot be paid for with real growth. The names change, but the sequence does not. Before we begin, remember 3 signals. First, debt above 90% of GDP. That does not mean instant collapse, but it means the road narrows. Growth becomes harder, interest becomes heavier, and every shock hurts more. Second, less than 3 months of import coverage in foreign exchange reserves. That means a country may not be able to defend its currency or pay for the food, fuel, and medicine it must buy from the world. Third, political control over money. When leaders try to print or suppress interest rates to solve a debt problem, they usually turn a difficult debt problem into a far more dangerous currency problem. Now look at the 7. Bangladesh is number 7. It is not here because it has reckless debt. Its debt ratio is still low compared with the danger line. It is here because it proves that even a successful growth story can become fragile when reserves fall quickly. For 20 years, Bangladesh looked like development done, right? Millions escaped extreme poverty. Garment factories supplied the world. Growth looked strong. Then came the pandemic, higher energy prices, and a stronger dollar export pressure hit the country. Fuel imports became more expensive. Dollar debt became harder to carry. Foreign exchange reserves fell from about $46 billion to under $21 billion in roughly 18 months. Power rationing followed. Factories lost hours. The warning is simple. Low debt does not protect a country if the dollars needed to run the economy are disappearing. Egypt is number 6. Egypt should never be treated as a small financial story. It controls the Suez Canal. It imports most of its wheat. It has more than 100 million people, food, currency, trade, and political stability all meet in the same place. Debt has moved above the 90% danger zone. The Egyptian pound has lost much of its value. Wheat and energy shocks made imports more expensive. IMF support has kept the system moving, but every rescue brings the same painful formula: devalue, cut subsidies, tighten spending, and ask the public to accept less. That is easy for economists to write. It is brutal for families who spend half their income on food. Egypt's crisis is the collision between creditors and citizens. Creditors want discipline. Citizens need relief. The weaker the currency becomes, the harder both demands become. Egypt has not crossed every line yet, but 2 warning lights are already on: debt stress and reserve pressure. The third light, abandoning monetary discipline under political pressure, is the one to watch. Pakistan is number 5, and here the danger becomes much easier to see. Pakistan has gone to the IMF again and again, more than 20 times since the late 1950s. That is not a temporary liquidity problem. That is a structure that keeps recreating the same crisis. At one point in 2023, Pakistan's reserves fell to a level that covered only weeks of imports. Imagine that: a nation of more than 200 million people, dependent on imported fuel and outside financing, almost ran out of the hard currency needed to keep basic trade functioning. The deeper trap is energy. Pakistan relies heavily on imported fuel for electricity. When fuel prices rise, the government can pass the pain to households or subsidize the difference with borrowed money. Politicians usually choose borrowing because it postpones anger, but postponement has a cost. Interest payments now consume an enormous share of federal revenue. Money that should build power plants, roads, schools, and productive capacity goes instead to servicing yesterday as promises. That is how the debt machine tightens. The country needs investment to escape the trap, but the trap eats the investment first. Turkey is number 4. Turkey teaches a different lesson. Credibility can be destroyed much faster than people think. Turkey is not a primitive economy. It has real industry, exporters, entrepreneurs, banks, and strategic importance. Yet between 2021 and 2023, inflation exploded and the lira collapsed because political leadership fought monetary reality. At the moment inflation required restraint, leadership pushed the idea that lower interest rates would cure the problem. Markets disagreed, citizens disagreed. The currency disagreed. A currency is a vote of confidence, and it votes every second. Once people believe the central bank will not protect money, they protect themselves. They buy dollars, gold, property, and anything outside the local currency. That behavior weakens the system further. Turkey has since tried to restore discipline with higher rates, but the damage shows a hard truth. Trust can be lost in months and rebuilt only over years. Argentina is number 3. Argentina is the memory of collapse. It has defaulted so many times that crisis has become part of its national financial language. But the pain is not academic, it is personal. In 2001, people who believed they held safe bank deposits discovered that governments under pressure can change the rules. Accounts were frozen, conversion terms were changed, savings that looked protected lost real value, not through a normal market decline, but through a decree. That is the lesson stable countries forget. When a government becomes desperate enough, it protects the system first and the saver second. Argentina now is attempting radical repair through spending cuts and fiscal discipline. Maybe it works, maybe it does not, but repeated default leaves scars that policy cannot erase quickly. A country can change laws faster than it can restore belief. Once citizens learn to distrust their own money, every future government must fight not only debt, but memory. Japan is number 2, and Japan is the quiet giant. Japan is rich, organized, technologically advanced, and politically stable. It does not look like a crisis. That is exactly why people miss the danger. Japan's debt to GDP ratio is around 263% in almost any other country. That would have triggered panic long ago. Japan survived because most of its debt is held at home by Japanese institutions, pension funds, banks, insurers, and the Bank of Japan. The system became a closed loop. That closed loop gave Japan time, but time is not a solution. When inflation returned, Japan faced the trap every over-indebted country eventually faces. Raise rates and the cost of servicing the debt becomes dangerous. Keep rates too low, and the currency weakens while purchasing power erodes. Neither path is clean. Japan may not collapse suddenly. It may experience something slower, a weaker currency, lower real purchasing power, and financial repression. But slow loss is still loss. A crisis does not need to arrive in one weekend to reshape a nation's wealth. Then comes number 1, the country nobody likes naming, the United States. Let me be clear, America is not about to collapse tomorrow. It has the reserve currency, the deepest financial markets, the strongest military, enormous productive capacity, and the ability to attract capital when the world is afraid. But strength is not immunity. The United States now spends more on interest on the national debt than on national defense. Debt to GDP is above 120%. Deficits remain enormous even outside of depression or a world war. Foreign buyers are less dominant at the margin. China has reduced treasury holdings gradually, not in panic, but in quiet repositioning. That is how major monetary shifts often begin, not with a scream, with a slow movement away from dependence. The dollar gives America extraordinary privilege. The world needs dollars for trade, reserves, and safety that lets America borrow longer and cheaper than other countries. But privilege can become a habit, and habit can become a trap. A reserve currency country does not usually default like a small country. It pays in its own money. The danger is not that you do not get your dollars back. The danger is that the dollars buy less. That is the real crisis for ordinary people. Not formal default, but years of inflation, lower real returns, financial repression, and quiet loss of purchasing power. So which country falls first? If by fall you mean a visible crisis, look toward the countries with weak reserves, import dependence, IMF reliance, and little political room. Pakistan and Egypt are closer to that edge. Bangladesh is earlier, but moving in the wrong direction. Argentina and Turkey already showed the mechanism, but if by fall you mean the country whose weakness changes the whole world, then the answer is different. Japan and America matter because they are not edges of the system, they are pillars. A small country can collapse and create tragedy. A core country can weaken and change global wealth. That is why this is not a foreign story. It is a map of one mechanism moving through different stages. Low reserves in Bangladesh, food pressure in Egypt, IMF dependency in Pakistan, broken credibility in Turkey, default memory in Argentina, debt postponement in Japan, interest burden in America, 7 countries, one pattern: when governments borrow too much, print too easily, and delay hard choices too long, the bill never disappears. It changes form. Sometimes it becomes inflation, sometimes it becomes devaluation, sometimes it becomes default, sometimes it becomes frozen savings, sometimes it becomes lower living standards for a generation. But it always lands somewhere. The intelligent person does not need to predict the exact day. That is a fool's game. The intelligent person asks better questions. Which currency do I depend on? Which government promises have I assumed are safe? What happens if money loses value slowly? Then suddenly that is not panic, that is preparation. By the time everyone agrees a crisis has arrived, the best decisions have usually already been made by someone else. These 7 countries are not all going to fall tomorrow, but they are showing us the same machine, and the machine is moving